One world currency.
The New World Order.
Those are the roots of trouble.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from federaljack.com. It's Popeye.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is October 10th, 2012. 10/10/2012. It is another live edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. It is the Wednesday edition. Coming up on Friday and Sunday, I got 2 commercial-free broadcasts, special broadcasts coming up for you guys. So stay tuned for that. And tonight, I'm going to be joined by Stephanie Sledge, who is an investigative journalist, and she runs thegovernmentrag.com. And she's going to be joining me after the first break. So there's a few things I want to cover really quick, because then the rest of the time I'm going to give to her, and I'm going to give her a decent part of the platform, because for those of you that don't know who she is, after tonight's interview with her, you're going to be paying attention to her blog and her website. She did what I consider a pretty in-depth article. And I don't even want to call it an article. Let's call it just research, because it's more than just an article. She's done some in-depth research into the Gifford shooting and Jared Lee Loughner. So we're going to be getting into that. A lot of people have no idea. That seems to be something that gets forgotten about quite often, actually. The whole Gabrielle Giffords, Jared Lee Loughner incident. I've said before on the broadcast, I really do believe that she was not the intended target, meaning Giffords. I think Giffords was a secondary target. I think the number one intended target was the one that got killed, being the judge. Now, there was conflicting reports about the whole scenario. People said there were 2 shooters. I think the FBI, if I remember correctly, and I'm going to have to ask Stephanie this because she would probably know better than I would, but I believe it was somewhere around 200 videos they had of the incident that day, between people's personal cameras, cell phones, security cameras surrounding the area. Around 200 videos the FBI has that they won't release. I wonder why. You notice how they wrapped that whole thing up with a nice little bow on it too, for the general public? You know, they wrapped, I don't know if anybody noticed that, but they wrapped that whole thing up. He pled guilty, boom, done. Nice big red bow on it. Jared Lee Loughner in jail. Everybody focuses on Gabrielle Giffords getting better, and I'm not bashing Giffords. Kudos to her if she really is hurt and she's recovering from that. I wish her all the best of luck. I know what it's like to recover from surgery, and not that I had a bullet wound in my head, but I know what it's like to recover from major surgery. So if If everything is as they say it is, and she really, she was shot in the head like they say she was, then hey, Godspeed to you. I hope you get better. But there is some questionable stuff. Yes, I've seen some people say that maybe perhaps the whole thing was staged. I don't know about that, but I do find it questionable that not once did you ever see any video or pictures of her in the hospital room or anything. And everybody says, oh, it was out of sensitivity and out of respect for her and her family. Since when has the media ever had respect for anybody? Let's be honest. So I find that a little shady, that there was never any. And they supposedly took a picture where she was done up, and maybe they were being nice to her. Maybe I'm just looking into this a little too much, but to me, it just seems a little shady that you only saw her lying on the stretcher, and then the next picture you saw was one, obviously, where they put makeup on her and did her up a little bit, so she'd look, halfway decent. And I understand if you've been in the hospital and all jacked up for a while, you don't want to look like crap in a photo. But I find it suspect that not one nurse, not one hospital employee, the janitor, some paparazzo scumbag sneaking in. There was never any photos of her, recovery. I mean, you see her mountain climbing now. They parade her around all over TV. But in between when she came out and when she was injured, there's never really any pictures. So that does fuel some of the people out there that say, oh, the whole thing was staged. Perhaps if they would just release the information and everybody got a chance to see it, then you wouldn't have all of this conjecture. You wouldn't have people speculating about whether or not it was faked or this or that. If they just released everything, then it would be all above board. But the fact that they don't shows that there's something there, shows that there's more to it. I always say, ladies and gentlemen, that the easiest way to find out if people are being scumbags and if something is going on that's shady is look at how the situation is dealt with after the fact. 9/11, the 9/11 Commission, the BP oil spill, the quote-unquote cleanup. Look at these things. Fukushima, they covered the response to that was criminal at the very least. Yeah, we have to look at these situations. You could look at the situation itself and dissect, and that's important too, because it's important to explain how things are done. But if you're one of these people that you haven't gone down the rabbit hole that far yet, and you don't, I don't know if they did it, maybe whatever was an accident or a terror attack or whatever. Look at the response, and tell me that that's an accident, and you'll see it's not. And the same thing with the Gabrielle Gifford shooting. Everything was locked up. The kid looked, first of all, let's be honest, Loughner looked like he was doped up. And the same thing with this Aurora, Colorado shooting. Look at this kid. He's doped up out of his mind. They bring him into court, and the media is parading. They got one of the family members on TV and got him all, because he was all emotional, and got him all worked up. Oh, he must be faking it to add insult to injury, to piss off the people that he killed. No, that guy is out of his mind on drugs in that courtroom, in that video. If you've ever seen the video of the Aurora, Colorado shooting when they finally brought this kid into the courtroom, he's just loaded on whatever the hell cocktail they've got him on. I don't think people realize the depth of levels they go. Freeman and I talked about this on Friday. We barely got into the mind control aspect. Believe me, when I say even though him and I went kind of deep into mind control, that's just treading the water, ladies and gentlemen. You've got to do the research on your own. One must investigate this on their own. And when you start to do it, you're going to see that it stinks to high hell. The response is very telling. The response to the Gabrielle Gifford shooting was very telling again. Going back to just the fact that you don't see any video of the incident. Well, Popeye, they're trying to be respectful. Really? Really? Like they were trying to be respectful with bin Laden when you didn't see those photos either? But when Saddam was, and I'm doing air quotes, when Saddam was hung, I still think that was one of his doubles, but when Saddam was hung, the video was out there. When his two kids were paraded around, There are pictures. I was in the military at the time. I remember running around, woohoo, we got him, because I was a moron. Not that Uday and Kusei were good people. They were both turds, but that's besides the point. Why did we sit there and put those photos up and say that, well, yeah, that's normal? But then when something shady happens in this country that affects law, that gets the public all worked up and afraid, you're a heretic if you say, well, can I see the video, please? Because let's go to the videotape. Oh, let me guess, the cameras weren't working, right? Must be. They all come from the same crappy camera company. All right, we're going to break. We'll be back. Don't go anywhere. Coming up, my guest, Stephanie Sledge. You don't want to miss it. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. And joining me tonight is my special guest, Stephanie Sledge. Stephanie, welcome to the broadcast.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
I want to jump right into it. First, I want you to take a couple minutes and introduce yourself to the listeners. Tell them about yourself and about your website, and then we can get into the Gabrielle Gifford shooting, Jared Lee Loughner, and anything else. But go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit to the listeners. The floor is yours.
Okay, well, my name is Stephanie Sledge, and I am the editor. I'm also a journalist. I have the governmentrag.com, which I do a lot of activism, trying to bring the truth to the people that's currently being suppressed by mainstream and the AP press. So I've joined the fight and trying to get the word out. I also carry a May Day blog, which tracks a lot of the military movement that's happening. And I'm also have studied and investigated the Jared Lee Loughner case.
Yeah, and I would say you've investigated it quite in detail. But the first segment I was talking about just the things, the red flags that I see, the shady things that I see going on with the whole investigation, and now it's all wrapped up with a nice little red bow on top, and he pled guilty and he's in jail forever and moved on. Just another quote unquote crazy with a gun, right? But I think there's more to it. So
that's right.
What was the first thing? What was the first red flag you saw?
Well, initially when the shooting had first happened, I had watched a lot of it play out on the mainstream news, constant coverage of it, and it actually played out for several weeks. It became a political fight. There was a lot of agenda that took place behind the scene, and so what I did was I noticed from the get-go that there was a lot of details that did not add up, and of course the political battle, blaming who back a year ago was also very important to what I believe, into solving a lot of this case was. And, one of the biggest things that came to light right away was the mainstream media. Basically what they did was they took a lot of the 911 calls, the original 911 calls that had come out of Pima County, and they had spliced those calls to fit the needs of the storyline that was being laid out right before our eyes. So that was one of the biggest things that I saw right away, was that the facts were not adding up with, the actual, 911 calls and a lot of witness testimony and stuff like that. So what I did was I started keeping notes, and the more I kept notes, the more it just began to unfold.
And how long would you say into the quote unquote investigation or the after effects of the shooting did you first pick up on this? Within like the first couple days?
Most definitely. The very first day I knew that there was something wrong. I had pegged it a false flag from the get-go, and it was mostly because of just the simple fact that the story wasn't making sense, and the fact that the sheriff out there in Pima County, he was more interested in, I guess, playing the political blame game than he was investigating the case. And so right away I knew it was a false flag. I just, there was just too many little things. Witness testimonies within the first 2 days were beginning to fall apart. what they would say on one channel wouldn't add up to another channel. And so, basically the witness testimonies and the 911 calls that were originally released were my first clues into this case, but it certainly was not what they were telling us it really is. Or it really was, anyway.
And I've noticed that as soon as the Aurora, Colorado shooting happened, it was like the same MO with the 911 tapes, things being taken out of context. As soon as the witnesses were coming out on TV and notice it was the local news that was airing the fact that there were multiple shooters. You really didn't see the big cable news companies talking about it, and that stuff got squashed real quick because the judge said, nope, nobody can speak to anybody. And then the cameras came into the courtroom. You could see how drugged up this kid was, and after everybody brought that up, within 2 days, the judge said no cameras in the courtroom. And that's going to get wrapped up with a nice little bow, just like the Jared Lee Loughner case. I could foresee it. It looks just as shady. Getting back into the Loughner thing, a lot of people said there were two shooters. What evidence have you come across about a second person there?
Well, to be quite frank with you, I believe that there could have been up to 4 shooters, and that information is based on witness testimony as well as the original 911 tapes that had been released right away that eventually had been taken off YouTube. Most of the original 911 tapes are gone. They had been squashed right away. They had been taken off the YouTube. So I guess I was lucky because I was able to get a lot of those 911 calls immediately following the shooting, as well as a lot of the broadcast tapes. And in my opinion, after studying this case for over a year, and as far as the witness testimony and all that, I believe that there was at least 4 shooters at the scene.
That sounds just like other shootings, the Sikh shooting again. The Sikh shooting is another example. Supposedly 4 gunmen at the scene, and then it's only a single gunman. And how much did you see with the Loughner story? How much did you see it changing? Especially like from what I understand, this is from what I remember now. He was stopped by a guy who had a weapon. I guess he had a concealed weapons permit, but he didn't shoot him. He made him get on the ground, and I guess when he distracted him with the gun, somebody else tackled him or something. That was one of the versions of the story I heard. What do you know? What do you know, at least from your investigation, that you would say happened? Well,
that was the original story that had come out, was that Jared Lee Loughner had been tackled by 5 heroes, and so originally, it was a little stumbling with the witnesses because the stories didn't add up between the AP and the mainstream. And so I began to read a lot of articles. And, of course, I was still watching a lot of videos that come out. And I would watch closely. There was a few witnesses / heroes that were, I felt, that needed to be investigated a little bit more because it was their stories that didn't add up. And one of them was Joe Zamudio. He claimed that he helped tackle Loughner, and he claimed that he had gone to the Walgreens, which was next door to the Safeway. And he claimed that he went there to buy a pack of cigarettes, and that he had worked for his mom in an art, I believe it was an art studio. He also made reference to the fact that he was used to be a retired football player, and so he was right away one of the very first witnesses that came onto mainstream and told his story about what happened. But after a couple of days, a lot of his story had changed. Also, there were pictures that had come out. There was an AP article that had been released, and I believe it was from the Arizona Daily Star, and he had claimed, the witnesses had claimed in this article that they had told Joe Zamudio that he had tackled the wrong guy. And so right there from the get-go, I knew that there was something wrong when there were bystanders, that had admitted to the newspaper that originally Joe Zamudio had tackled the wrong guy. And so I looked into him a little bit more. Some pictures ended up coming out of him.
Steph, I'm going to cut you off right there. We can pick it up right there on the other side because we got a break sneaking up on us. Ladies and gentlemen, don't go anywhere. More with my guest tonight, Stephanie Sledge. Go check her website out, governmentrag.com. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back, and we got cut off by the break. Stephanie was getting into detail about one of the quote-unquote heroes of the day involving the Gabrielle Giffords shooting by Jared Lee Loughner. Steph, go ahead and pick up where you were talking about. I forget the guy's name. What was the supposed hero's name?
His name was Joe Zamudio, and he was one of the first witnesses that came forward that described the scene. He talked about Jared Lee Loughner and how he and others had tackled him to the ground, how they had taken away his gun and secured the scene. And he also claimed that he had a gun there that day, that he had a carrying gun that he carried around with him. And he also, talked about how he didn't need to use it because, that there were other people that had secured the scene. But his testimony doesn't add up in several ways. And one of the ways is that there was pictures that had come out where showing Joe Zamudio wearing an EMT outfit, a uniform. And so he failed to, initially during all of, the whole story breaking, where, the first couple of days they were laying out all the information, according to the witnesses and stuff. He had claimed that, he just worked for his mom and he was just an average Joe guy, that, he never once admitted that he was an EMT, but he was found with an EMT uniform on. And he also was found on the same day wearing 3 different sets of clothes. So his story just didn't add up at all. And so, I looked into him just a little bit more.
Wow, I didn't even know that. So, would you say that that would be for the after story, the cover up, that it was, let's say, faked, or you had fake witnesses or heroes or whatever out there? Or would you say that this entire thing there were actually other quote-unquote actors? And when I say actor, again, that doesn't just mean some Hollywood actor, ladies and gentlemen. The CIA and the military call certain individuals during certain things actors. They also call warfare, the stage of war, we'll call it a theater. So one must remember that we are not the ones making up the term character or anything else. This is like a big living soap opera, a big movie, interactive almost, that they play. So would you say, in your estimation, that this thing was not only did they kill the judge, but do you think this was also a psyop?
Well, most definitely. This was absolutely what they needed to bring the agenda forth that came about during and following the shooting and what's been taking place in the past year and a half. And, I mean, immediately following the shooting, the whole story began to fall apart at the seams. And most of it was when witness testimony, 9/11 calls, a lot of the police broadcasts, there were a lot of church stories and funeral fabrications is what I call them. And, of course, law enforcement tales, and the personal hero accounts. They all began to unravel a web of lies. And what they did to cover it up, once they found out that some of the alternative media was looking into it a little bit more, they began to shift a lot of the focus to Gabrielle Giffords and her husband, Mark Kelly, where they became almost like false superheroes, I guess, in the eyes of the American public over the last year. And so Jared Lee Loughner and this whole event, and, the other people that were killed, the federal judge, the 9/11 girl, the other 4 victims that were killed, they're not even talked about. The only thing that you really see of any information about Christina Taylor Greene, who was the 9-year-old girl that was allegedly killed that day, who was allegedly born on 9/11/01. You don't really see much in the news of her unless there's some kind of nonprofit organization fundraising on her behalf. But as far as Judge John Roll, there was a lot of alternative media that did discuss Judge John Roll, but only to the extent really where it was kind of just the usual spewing out of what was released from an Examiner. I believe it was an Examiner article, but a lot of that wasn't even true. So even a lot of the alternative media hasn't even begun to understand a lot of the facts in this case.
Yeah, see, this was kind of, I know other shootings occurred and there's more going on in the world, but this was kind of pushed back and nobody, I think it's kind of gotten forgotten about. I mean, not only did it get forgotten about, obviously, by the mainstream media because they put their little red bow on it because he pled guilty and it swept under the rug, but a lot of the people in the alternative media, I think, have forgotten about it almost. It gets brought up, but there's a lot of different things that I don't think people realize or know about. What would you say is the biggest red flag in the cover-up? What's the biggest thing that screams that you could show to a dumbed-down person and they would say, yeah, it's a cover-up?
Well, for one thing, the facts about Jared Lee Loughner is quite humorous, just simply because, a lot of people just believe, the story that he was just an insane schizophrenic that, smoked marijuana and went off the deep end, apparently, and just decided to be, angry at the world and go to the Safeway store and shoot all these people. And it really does surprise me when I do talk to people about this case, because even if I bring up, Jared Lee Loughner, a lot of people, they don't even know who he is. They have no idea how this case has impacted America. And I would say that probably 3/4 of the people that I talk to absolutely have no idea anything at all about this case at all. They usually respond like, well, I heard something about it. And so that was the goal of the mainstream. It was to start a political war that would initially heat the gun grab debates. And so I believe that there was a lot of agenda behind the scenes, not only with disarming Americans, but also there was a lot of medical agenda that took place as well. So I would say probably as far as the people goes, that most people generally think, that they know that there's some sort of cover-up, but they don't really know, they know that he might be a patsy, but they really don't understand the concept of why this shooting is so important for America to look at, because it is I know that there has been other shootings, like in Colorado, and of course in the past, like the Columbine shootings and whatnot, but this particular shooting was, not only do I believe that it was premeditated, 3 years in advance, but it was one of the biggest agenda pushes behind the scenes that I think that any other false flag other than 9/11 has played out. And of course, this particular shooting is directly related to 9/11 because of the fact that they brought 9/11 into this shooting. They brought 9/11 to Tucson, and so we had to relive 9/11 through this shooting, and that was a big connection in this case.
And I would say that's all the more reason to call it a PSYOP, a psychological operation. And right. I think you're right. You're dead on with the gun grabbers, because again, you look at the response. What was the first thing that they did when the smoke wasn't even done coming out of the barrel of the gun, right? And what's the first thing that they were screaming about? Taking the guns away from the people.
That's right. They wanted to demonize the Glock 19 and, of course, the extended magazine that Jared Lee Loughner allegedly had. And we've seen that throughout, recent history where, whenever, there's some type of shooting or whatever, there's always some political rhetoric that takes place. And the one thing that I found very interesting was a lot of the victims in this case, and we're talking, there wasn't just 6 people dead, there was also 13 people injured, including Gabrielle Giffords. And so the rest of the victims, A lot of them are on the bandwagon and in the nonprofit arena to push for disarming Americans and changing the gun laws.
Yeah, and it's the very same people that you see pushing the very same agenda with all these other shootings. Ladies and gentlemen, we got a break sneaking up. Don't go anywhere. More with my guest, Stephanie Sledge, when we get back. Check her website out. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. And during the break, Steph and I were talking about Federal Jack, my website. And I find it interesting that she's had some of the same issues that I've had as well on Facebook, but I seem to be getting a lot of emails as of late telling me that people can't post articles from Federal Jack on Facebook. They can't share links. And Stephanie was even telling me that she's been blocked from going to the site, as in she'll try to bring it up, going to see whatever I've posted as of late, and it'll come up as a blank screen and just nothing will show up. So when I tell people that we get screwed with and that the site gets messed with all the time, even Activist Post wrote about it, that somebody couldn't get into it. Us, Federal Jack, InfoWars, and Activist Post were blocked from the Sheraton hotel chain. And I know people that have tried it since, and they said, yep, you're blocked. So I find it interesting. Obviously, I'm not crazy. Obviously, other people are seeing it. So, Stephanie, getting back into the Jared Lee Loughner thing, before we go too deep down the rabbit hole and I forget to plug this, I want you to plug, you have a report that you're actually putting together. I think you said it was over 400 pages long about the whole case. Where can people find the report? Is it going to be available on the website?
Yes, if you go to thegovernmentrag.com, which is www.thegovernmentrag.com, on the very top left-hand side it says investigations. And when you click on that, you can read all about my report. It's 400 pages. It's all about the truth about the Jared Lee Loughner case. It ranges from who Jared Lee Loughner was to witnesses, eyewitness testimony to agenda. So it has everything that you are not going to hear on mainstream or read about in the AP press. It is definitely an investigation that goes deep into agenda, which a lot of people joke with me that I've uncovered, the biggest sci-fi investigation that they've ever heard of. And it really is true. My investigation does lead deep into military agenda as well as NASA agenda and the medical establishment agenda, and it also goes deep into mind control. So there is a lot to this case, and like I said, it is a case that a lot of journalists label the case that is making or breaking American freedom, and the reason why is because it wasn't just a shooting. There was massive agenda pushed through behind the scenes, and I believe that the agenda cannot be reversed. It really is a deep, dark agenda, and so we can get into that a little bit later as far as the agenda goes, but my book can be found there, and you can order it. You can go and you can make a donation to the Government Rag, and you can receive a free copy of my investigative report.
That's awesome. And ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to go to her website, thegovernmentrag.com. Again, all spelled out, thegovernmentrag.com, and help Stephanie out, because she's one of the only people out there that's done an in-depth investigation into Loughner and into the Gabrielle Gifford shooting. And this report she's put together is a doozy. So help her out. She's not getting paid for this. She doesn't get a paycheck from anybody to do this. She's doing this. She's volunteering. And you know how I am. If I believe in somebody and I believe in their work, I support them. So go check her website out, donate, and you get the report. thegovernmentrag.com. So, Steph, you brought up a really good point, mind control. And a lot of people don't realize how mind control and NASA are connected. I suggest anybody that hasn't ever gotten the book, I've mentioned it 1,000 times and I'll mention it 1,000 more, and I'm trying to get her on as a guest, go get Kathy O'Brien's book, The Transformation of America. And also get Bryce Taylor's book, Thanks for the Memories. When you read those two books, first of all, your mind will be completely blown. That's one. And two, you'll have a better understanding of the level of things when it comes to these mind control programs and how they make mind-controlled assassins. I mean, this stuff is the real deal. You know what movie I just saw recently, Steph, was it was the remake of the old Sinatra movie, The Manchurian Candidate.
Okay.
I saw the Denzel Washington version of it, and it blew my mind because I've seen the movie before, but I had to go back and watch it again, and it was almost like they literally went and talked to the people that actually do this and had them write the script, because you see the RFID chips, you see how the trauma-based mind control that goes on, and it's just astonishing. What did you find to be what connections did you find with Loughner to mind control? Did you find any connections to mind control experience? Did any of the doctors who are usually involved with this kind of stuff, did you hear any of the familiar names popping up like you normally do in a lot of these cases? Things usually go back to the same people?
Well, not necessarily. What I did find was that all the reports that came out about Jerry Lee Loughner, the very first scream that I heard in the background for Agenda was for mental health. And of course, that raised the big red flag to me, because I think most generally a lot of people do know that the medical health profession is deeply tied to mind control. And so a lot of places that have mind control are, psych wards and who operate in federal prisons and whatnot. And one of the things that I found very interesting was, as soon as the shooting took place, there was a lot of articles that had come out in a lot of the AP articles claiming that, if they just, he was just a lost loner, and if people would have got help for him, then, he probably would have been recognized and then helped before this happened. But the truth is that Jared Lee Loughner did have a past, and he had been in trouble with the juvenile system, where he had been put into I guess what I would consider to be a juvenile treatment center, and specifically for drugs and alcohol use. He had been arrested when he was a teenager, according to a lot of the court records that I had located on Jared Lee Loughner. And so Jared Lee Loughner did have a past where he had some, affiliation with behavioral modification centers, which are very, very closely related to mind control. A lot of the mind control, people think mind control is just where they hook up a bunch of things to your head, and you get shocked and then you leave, and you're under mind control, or hypnosis. But that's not necessarily the case. The re-educating of the youth nowadays involves a lot of mind control, and it starts in the juvenile systems. And these children are sent to treatment centers where, they allege that they need to get help for, their drug use or their alcohol use. But in reality, what they're doing is they re-educate the child. And they're like re-education camps, basically. And what they do there is a lot of them are put on medications. And, of course, a lot of these medications do have nanotechnologies and whatnot in there. And then, of course, a lot of them do have to go through the process of obeying before they can get out and get off all this stuff. So one of the things that I did find was that Jared Lee Loughner did see a psychiatrist. And his name was Dr. Thomas Britton. And he saw him when I believe he was 17. It was in 2007. And he had a private practice in Tucson, and what I found most interesting is that he was subcontracted out by the Department of Defense. And now I was unable to determine or find any information on what exactly he, was subcontracted out by the Department of Defense for, but because he is a psychiatrist, the correlation of the mind control operation is definitely there. And I found it very interesting as well that Dr. Britton died earlier this year, and it was just 2 weeks prior to the death of Gabrielle Gifford's author, Jeffrey Zaslow, who was a columnist and former employee of the Wall Street Journal and Sun-Times. So he's gone. He can't be questioned or asked any questions. He just died.
Cleaned up with a nice little red bow so that Loughner could go, I did it, and they could lock him up, and that would be it. Wash their hands of it, and it's all done. That's pretty convenient. How did they die? Like car accidents?
Well, Dr. Britton died, I believe, of a form of cancer. That's what they said in his obituary. I believe he died of cancer.
Fast-acting cancer?
And then Gabrielle Gifford's author, Jeffrey Zaslow, he died in a car accident.
Was it a fast-acting cancer? Do you know?
I really don't know. They didn't have any details. And what I found interesting is there was only one story about Dr. Britton. It was the only story. It was his obituary that actually, said that Jared Lee Loughner had saw him, that he was Jared Lee Loughner's psychiatrist. So there's not much information at all on Dr. Thomas Britton. It's pretty much all been scrubbed off the internet.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to cut us off. We'll be back for hour number 2. We're going to have to leave you drooling for more. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a few minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with hour number 2 here on tonight's live edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. It is October 10th, 2012. I am your host, Popeye, from federaljack.com. As always, I'll tell you to give my website a look-see. I'm sure you'll find at least 1 or 2 things on there that you will find interesting, to say the least. Joining me tonight for the second hour is my special guest, Stephanie Sledge, who has an awesome website of her own, and I urge you to support her in any way that you possibly can. thegovernmentrag.com, thegovernmentrag.com. And going into the break, we were discussing Loughner's shrink and some of the deaths of certain people that were involved in this. And we had, during the break, I was talking to Stephanie about Jolly and West, who I was referring to in the first hour when I asked her if there were certain doctors. And the reason I didn't bring up his name is because I didn't want to lead it anywhere. I just wanted to see if his name popped up. But Stephanie will get into that, and she could touch on, she didn't find a direct connection, but there is a connection, like 6 degrees of separation, I guess, if you will. So let's get into the mysterious deaths again. Just in case somebody's tuning in fresh, they didn't hear the first hour. It was his shrink that was taking care of Loughner from before this whole shooting, from back in the day when he was younger and he had issues. And it was also a writer that was writing about Giffords.
Yeah, Gabrielle Gifford's book had come out just recently, within the last year, I believe. And her husband, Mark Kelly, who works for NASA, he's an astronaut, he had co-authored the book along with Jeffrey Zaslow. And Jeffrey was a columnist and former employee of Wall Street Journal and the Sun-Times. And back in January, he was killed in a car accident, just died. So he's also another person that has come up either dead or missing in this case.
And I find it funny because, and when I say funny, I don't mean funny, haha. I mean like funny, like Spock eyebrow raising funny. That anytime you see an event like this, certain witnesses happen to die in mysterious accidents afterwards, or leading right up. If there's somebody in the past, it happens leading right up, maybe to the event, maybe a little bit right before, or directly right after. It's always convenient that certain deaths seem to happen. And I had asked you during the break about any connection to Jolly and West, and you said there wasn't a direct connection, but like I was saying, the whole 6 degrees of separation thing. So what did you find? What connections did you find to mind control experiments, anything, like I said, if West's, even breezes by it? What did you seem to find?
Well, there is a lot of people in this case that have connections to universities that are definitely known for their mind control projects, and one of them is the one of the victims that was allegedly shot 3 times. She is the one that had brought the little 9-year-old girl to the scene that day, and she is a very close ties to. Her name is, I'm trying to remember her name offhand. It'll come to me. But anyway, she basically has really deep ties into Cornell University, into the human ecology program, and she's also on the alumni board. And so there's a lot of other people in this case, too, that have deep ties to UCLA and, a lot of their majors or basically what they do for a living also ties into a lot of these mind control projects. And another thing I found interesting was that Jared Lee Loughner had listed a phone number I had found. It was on an administrative office of courts document in Arizona, an Arizona Superior Court document. And he had listed a phone number on that document that came back under the name of D. Green. And it only came back under the name of D. Green. So it was an initial D. Green. And as I studied the case, there were a couple of people that have come up in this case that have the name D. Green. And because of privacy records and the fact that there was a gag order put on this case early on, some of this information cannot be retrieved right now. And so 2 people that did come up in this case were Dallas Green, who is the grandfather of Christina Taylor Green. But there was also a Dr. D. Lee Green, who was also, he did a study with Dr. Lynn Fenton. And Dr. Lynn Fenton was also the psychiatrist that had seen the alleged Aurora, Colorado shooter. So, there is some correlations between the 2 shootings, and there's also deep ties into mind control and human ecology, as well as a lot of the other, majors that universities generally use mind control operations in. And they can mind control operations range from, people putting out the news to drugging people up. So I do know that there is several people in this case that have come up, and they are definitely connected to these mind control projects.
And I said within, a few hours of learning of the whole thing that day that it looks shady, but people need to, because I don't like to jump to conclusions. So it's important not to be like, oh, it's, right off the bat, oh my God, it's mind control, blah, blah. Because then if it's not, you look like a putz. So right. I wanted to give it a few days. And Stephanie, I'll tell you, the more time I gave it, the more, like you said, things just fell apart right from the get-go. The story started to change. And then when you look at, again, if you compare the Gifford shooting to the Aurora, Colorado massacre and that Sikh temple shooting, it's like they played from the same playbook. They just kept, they changed some of the details, but the basic template is the same thing. And everything seems to get wrapped up really nice. In the case of the Sikh Indian shooting, the guy popped himself. Well, supposedly he popped himself, and then first it was said he was shot by the cop, and then it was said that he popped himself. So either way, he's dead. It's rather convenient. He can never testify. The other guy, I'm sure the one in the Colorado shooting, I'm sure he'll get imprisoned. And then Loughner, he's probably going to get life. I'm sure he'll never get parole, just like Sirhan, because part of the condition of parole is you have to show empathy for what you've done. And if you can't remember actually doing it, which seems to be the case often, to your knowledge and your investigations, has Loughner come out and said at all during this? Because there is, like you said, a gag order, so there's a lot of stuff that nobody talks about, and it's kind of swept under the rug. Has he ever come out and said, I didn't do it?
No, he hasn't. In fact, we haven't seen any live footage whatsoever of Jared Lee Loughner. I mean, we haven't seen any at all tapes or anything released to the crime scene whatsoever. And so Jared Lee Loughner is a mystery. And in fact, a lot of the pictures that are being shown to the public and that are still being shown to the public this day, I believe are not accurate pictures of Jared Lee Loughner based on friend testimonies and other people and witnesses that I personally did speak to when I went out to Tucson to investigate. And one of the victims did state to a couple of researchers that they had gone to his house and they had asked him about, they wanted to see his wound, and they asked him about, just random questions about, his experience as far as, what happened out there. And he himself had claimed that the pictures that they're showing on the AP press and the mainstream media are not the person that he saw at the scene that day. And so there is some discrepancies about the mugshots that
Stephanie, I'm going to cut us off because we got a break sneaking up. Ladies and gentlemen, don't go anywhere. More brain candy when we get back. We're going to pick it up right here. We're back in 3 minutes. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. And when we got interrupted by the break, we were discussing some of the oddities about Loughner himself, such as people that know him are saying that the pictures that they're showing look nothing like him. That's not even him at all. And I noticed their favorite picture, by the way, to show Stephanie, is that bald-headed, crazy-looking picture where he's all wide-eyed. And I mean, who knows if that's even him? But that looks menacing, or that looks like somebody that might hurt you, or crazy at least. And a lot of his friends are saying that that's not him, correct?
I've had a lot of people tell me that that's not really Jared Lee Loughner who they're showing in the pictures. I've also had people tell me that some of the pictures that have been released where he was doing a fundraiser is in fact Jared Lee Loughner. But I know that a lot of the pictures, the two pictures that were released, one by Pima County and then the other by the Marshal's Office, that clearly there is photoshopping involved. And I don't believe that the pictures that they're showing us, even to this day, are actually Jared Lee Loughner.
I wonder where they got it could be an actor just with makeup on. I mean, who knows? And like you said, they Photoshop. Once you bring Photoshop in, game on. And if they Photoshopped one photo, then they probably Photoshopped more than one photo. They wouldn't. I can't see them just screwing with one photo and trying to leave things there. And you brought up something else during the break that just totally blew me away, and I can't get my mind off of it right now. I asked you a just pretty simple question. Do you think it's symbolic of that little girl that got killed, that she was born on 9/11? And you just blew me out of the water with what you told me. So go ahead and tell the listeners what you told me.
Well, there is a lot of symbolism in this case, and a lot of it does tie into 9/11. And one of the things that I found that was very, very interesting to me was the fact that while I had investigated Christina Taylor Greene's mother, Roxana Green is her mother and John Green is her father. And one of the things that I had found that was alarming to me was that Christina Taylor Greene's mother had trademarked her name and her products back in 2007. This was way prior to the shooting, which happened in 2011. So I found that just I was astounded at the fact that she now sells Christina Taylor Greene products for her nonprofit organization that she set up to raise money for her daughter after her alleged death. And they are the very products that she had trademarked back in 2007.
That's just, that's astonishing to me. Now, does that mean that it's all fictionalized and everything else? No. I mean, it could be that her mother, literally, they knew that eventually this little girl was going to be sacrificed. I know I know, ladies and gentlemen. Now I'm treading on to the conspiracy theory stuff, right? I know I'm talking about that they do sacrificial rituals. Uh-oh. I know that I'm getting into uncomfortable territory for some, but guess what? It is what it is. It's a fact that they do this stuff. So do I know for a fact that what I just said happened? No. But we can speculate a little bit because when Stephanie told me this, it just blew me away. I mean, for her mother to have all this stuff trademarked beforehand, she must have known. And I find it kind of creepy that it was 3 years. You ever notice there's certain numbers they use, Stephanie, and things always, again, 9/11 comes up. And the biggest connection I see with that is tapping into that emotion from a 9/11, that emotion that it was compartmentalized, because that was a trauma-based mind control event, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody was, and by the way, it was re-accessed on the 10th anniversary. That's why people were breaking out their flags and, I'm proud to be an American, where at least I think I'm free. That emotion is what I see they tried to tap into with the Giffords thing. And then what's your take on Gabrielle Giffords coming back and that whole ceremonial, her coming back in and then playing it up like, oh, she's back, and they clapped, and I think she read a poem or something or whatever, or no, the national anthem, whatever the hell it was. She recited something. Maybe it was a Pledge of Allegiance, whatever. To me, that was a psyop. It was all, running on that sympathy, the appeal to emotion. What say you, Stephanie?
Well, I do agree that there is something very suspicious about the whole Gabrielle Giffords and Mark Kelly story that's playing out before our eyes, and it's almost like another Days of Your Lives episode, and these two people, and, if Gabrielle Giffords was really shot, then I do feel sorry for her that she had to go through all the pain and suffering of, going through all the medical procedures and all that to get back to where she's at. But in the same respect, a lot of stuff just doesn't add up. I mean, for instance, this was a congresswoman who I spoke to a lot of people when I went out to Tucson. And a lot of people, their take on Gabrielle Giffords was, one, they didn't want to see her get shot, obviously, because, nobody really wants that to happen. And the thing is, though, is that a lot of people expressed that she really wasn't, she was kind of a fallen legislator. I mean, she didn't accomplish a whole lot. She was, there were people that told me that they looked at her as a follower, that she really wasn't a leader. And so there was a lot of things about Gabrielle Giffords that at the very beginning, I really thought, she was this big, bold, congresswoman who had a lot to say and was changing a lot out there. But it turns out that it really wasn't that way. And it probably was because, a lot of people that are in those positions, they're faced with situations where they want to change things, but they know they can't because there's a much bigger agenda going on behind the scenes. And the fact that I did find when they held a vigil for her right after the shooting, there were literally thousands and thousands of people that had gone to the hospital and did a makeshift memorial there. And I did find one little teeny note that stood out to me, and it was to Gabrielle Giffords, and it said, "Thank you for your sacrifice." And I thought that was very strange because, to me, it just didn't seem like, why would it be a sacrifice for Gabrielle Giffords? In my opinion, there's a lot of things that Gabrielle Giffords might have known. For instance, she might have known about the Fast and Furious scandal. And there is some investigators that do believe that she did have inside knowledge, along with Judge John Roll, that they did know about the ATF's Fast and Furious that was going on, and that it was in the process of being exposed. So, at first I thought, she could have been, they wanted to take her out because of that. But in the same respect, they also thanked her for her sacrifice, and now she's kind of in the forefront. And even since then, the Navy did give her her own ship. They issued the USS Gabrielle Giffords, and it was presented to her, and Christina Taylor Greene's mother was listed as the sponsor of the ship.
Wow.
Yeah, so this goes much deeper.
Yeah, and for those of you that don't know, it's not every day that you get a ship named after you. It doesn't matter if you're a congressman or a senator who was shot, because there's plenty of them that have been shot or killed in weird circumstances that have never gotten ships named after them. So that in itself is a little shady. I'm going to cut us off because we got a break sneaking up on us. Man, just talking to you, Stephanie, time's flying right by. Ladies and gentlemen, don't go anywhere. And if you want to get the full report, over 400 pages, go to Stephanie's website, thegovernmentrag.com. We'll be right back. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. And when we were going on a break, Stephanie brought up a huge point about the ship there. That's really shady. Two points about it. One, that they named the ship after Giffords. Of course, it plays into the narrative that they're trying to set. I understand why they did it. I'm not questioning that. It's just that's a big red flag, because normally you have to be some high-ranking admiral or who usually ends up being like the Secretary of Defense at one point, or a former maybe Joint Chiefs of Staff, something along the lines of that, or a president. And a lot of times now they'll name them after states, or sometimes they even name them after cities. But to have it named after Giffords, that to me that was like right, Spock eyebrow. And then the second point, which Stephanie just exposed, was the fact that the little girl's mother, who she already showed how there was some shadiness there and weird shenanigans going on with that whole thing with the mother of this little girl, and who was born on 9/11, right? Now this woman is the sponsor of a vessel, a United States naval vessel. Does this make any sense to you, Stephanie? Because it doesn't make any sense to me.
It does not make sense to me. I mean, I guess that, I would have thought that it would have been named, if they were going to name a ship after somebody in this event, it would have been either Judge John Wall or possibly even Christina Taylor Greene. But I just find it extremely suspicious that the Navy would divulge into Gabrielle Giffords and, of course, Roxana Greene.
Which is really strange, again, because just it's people. I don't. If you don't understand, you can ask a Navy vet. They just don't name ships after just anyone. So it's, and I know people could say, well, she's a national hero, Popeye. How is she a hero? Again, that goes with what you were talking about with the sacrifice thing. How could someone think she was a hero? Well, she was standing her ground as a senator or a congresswoman, and she did her, she was an elected official, and you know what I mean? That's the argument that they would come out with, even if it wasn't her, if it was, whoever. If they were a senator or a congresswoman, they're looked at like, again, they're a superhero and they're saving the day. I want to know if she had any pro Second Amendment stance. Like you brought up a good point. What did she know about the Fast and Furious thing, especially with the fact that it came out a couple months ago, right? And all this heat was on hold during the Obama administration. You got to wonder if they were trying to clean house earlier because they thought that it might start, things might come out now. So what did she know about that? But do you know if she was pro-gun at all? Or if she had a pro-gun stance?
If I remember right, I don't have my information directly in front of me, but I do believe that she did state on her website that she was for the Second Amendment. And so I never really ran across anything that said that Gabrielle Giffords was for confiscation of guns or anything like that. I do believe that she did support the Second Amendment.
And I know the judge, didn't he rule against Clinton's assault weapons ban?
He did. He won, or he handed down a ruling, which was a notorious case, obviously, with Sheriff Mack. And he basically reversed the Brady bill that was standing, they had imposed regulations to, I believe it was to keep assault rifles for them to remain illegal, but I believe he lifted that at that time.
So it's interesting how a man who was fighting for gun rights as a judge and a congresswoman who obviously, as you said, it was stated on her site that she, supported the Second Amendment, even if it was in saying it verbally only. If she didn't rule, if she never voted against anything on the, in regards to Second Amendment rights or gun rights, and she was verbal about supporting it, then one must say, well, maybe she really was into the Second Amendment. So don't you find it funny how somebody that's for the Second Amendment and a judge who was trying to protect Second Amendment rights for the people in this country were both the targets of this quote-unquote lone nutbag who got a gun because, hey, gun laws are too easy here in the United States of America?
I do. But I also know, too, that, a lot of people do want to immediately go to the gun control issue was the reason why she could have been shot and why the judge could have been assassinated. But the truth is that it was just one of, a long list of things that Judge John Roll had been working on, in many cases that he was presiding over. And there were many cases, in my opinion, that could have been a threat to the agenda. It wasn't just gun control, but there were other cases, too, that I believe that Judge John Roll was actually presiding over at the time of his death that could have very well have exposed some damning information about the future agenda of America. So, Gabrielle Giffords, her role after the shooting is to be a superhero. In fact, they even published a comic book with Gabrielle Giffords on it. And this was all about bringing 9/11 back in. Like you said, it was the 10th anniversary in 2011. And from the very get-go in January on, we heard nothing but 9/11 information. And we had to relive it every day for almost an entire year. And it started with the Jared Lee Loughner shooting. And from that point on, it basically was a rival of superheroes that was to be born onto the nation. And when I say that, what I mean is that there was a deep medical agenda that took place behind the scenes. And it was called suspended animation. And I know that it sounds so sci-fi, like, something that you'd see back in the olden day movies or something that you'd see on a sci-fi movie. But the truth is that the medical agenda that they needed to push forward in this case had to do with someone being shot in the head. And what the goal was suspended animation was the doctors that had performed the surgery on Giffords after she was shot, they had performed the procedure called suspended animation. And what that is it's a cooling process, and there's a really, really long definition for it, but the short definition is basically where you're not really dead, but you're not really alive. Your soul is just suspended. And so what it was the doctors that performed the surgery on her have very deep military ties into the Navy, into the Department of Health. And so what they needed this agenda for suspended animation to be passed so that there could be further work into this suspended animation. And NASA needs it for further research into their exploration into Mars. And also the FDA did approve it following the shooting, and then the Army did fund many research projects to continue the work into suspended animation for their super soldier projects.
And, it wouldn't be past these people, and I wouldn't put it past them. It wouldn't be beyond them to shoot somebody like Giffords in the head and multiple different agendas, but one of them being, hey, now they have a live human test subject to prove. Because how many times do you see it? Even in the movies, they showed where a contractor is trying to get something across, wants to sell something to the Pentagon or whatever, and they'll stage an event or they'll use the weapon on a live human target for whatever reason. Perhaps the person that they're going to try to kill with it might know too much, blah, blah, blah. It sounds kind of like what's going on here. And who's to say if that's, if I'm accurate or not, but it really looks, at least from my standpoint, especially that you said the FDA, how long after Giffords was shot did this whole thing get passed and the suspended animation research get, fast-tracked?
Well, it was definitely within the first year. I believe within 6 months, it started becoming into the forefront where it was apparent that NASA needed it. And also, too, DARPA also has an interest in suspended animation, and that is because they have been doing studies on squirrels into deep mind control and into sleep studies. And so I'm going to cut
us off right there because the break's sneaking up on us. But this is some interesting stuff. And ladies and gentlemen, remember what Freeman and I were talking about last week about human avatars and what DARPA is working on. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Final segment for this evening's broadcast. Man, it just ripped right by. Make sure you go check out Stephanie's website, thegovernmentrag.com, thegovernmentrag.com, fully spelled out. Now, we one segment left. We don't got a ton of time, so I want to hop right back into it. I'm not going to waste too much time here. And there's a few things still in this I want to cover. One of them being the shadiness of Gabrielle Giffords' husband, who works for NASA, and he's obviously NASA's directly connected to this research with DARPA and mind control research. It's a very, very deep rabbit hole when you discuss mind control, ladies and gentlemen. Again, to understand the stuff that we're discussing tonight, some of the crazier stuff, you have to read The Transformation of America by Kathy O'Brien and Mark Phillips, and you have to read the Thanks for the Memories by Bryce Taylor. Those two, there's plenty of other written works on mind control as well, but to understand the crazy end of things that Stephanie and I are talking about this evening, you have to read those two books, because Kathy O'Brien talks about how NASA is connected to mind control and all this other stuff. But the DARPA thing comes into it, and when Stephanie was talking about suspended animation, this links up with what Freeman and I were discussing last week, Friday, when he was on. And we were going over how they're trying to make DARPA is actually working. And I shouldn't say trying. They've created human avatars. Whether it's biologic or robotic, it's a humanoid entity, we'll say, a physical form being piloted by somebody else's mind in a different body that's hooked up to computers and, probably got little electrodes taped to their forehead or whatever they do. And this is all directly connected. And Stephanie also brought up a really good point during the break that the suspended animation would be required to travel to Mars, just like you see in a lot of these movies, in a lot of the sci-fi movies going back to even 20, 30 years ago. They would have to put people in suspended animation. So were they prepping us for that type of future? Perhaps. And I asked Stephanie a question. Steph, I asked you during the break, do you think Gabby was used as a test subject per se with this suspended animation, and perhaps they whatever, because of the trauma to her head, they were able to show how the capabilities of it, and then therefore that's why it got fast tracked by the FDA. Do you think that's a possibility?
Definitely, it was a possibility, and whether she was a test subject or not, I can't be sure 100%. But I do find it suspect that all this agenda took place based on a bullet to her head that at first they couldn't even figure out which way it went. Did it come from the back or the front to the back? So they couldn't get their story straight on how she was shot from the very beginning. First she was dead, then she was alive, then she was shot from the back to the front, then she was shot from the front to the back. And then, of course, Dr. Peter Ree, who has deep ties to the Navy, that actually was the doctor from the University of Arizona that actually performed the procedure on her, he stated that they couldn't even be sure which way the bullet came in. So there is a lot of shady information. Whether this actual surgery took place or whether it was said to have taken place so they could pass this agenda, I can't be certain. But either way you look at it, it appears that she was a pawn.
Yeah, she was obviously used, one way or another, and like you said, sacrificed or partially sacrificed. I mean, she's not. If indeed the woman that was shot in the head and the person you see now is indeed the same person and she is disabled, then that would be considered her sacrifice, and she just would have been used and abused. The first segment before I brought you on, I brought this question up, and I meant to ask you this. I'm glad I remembered before the end of the broadcast. When it comes to her and her whole surgery and hospital visits, you ever notice that there's no pictures of her, except there's like one staged photo where they obviously put makeup on her, and did her up so she looked somewhat nice or whatever, and made her look as good as they could. But you never really saw any videos or pictures of her with tubes coming out of her mouth, or her husband at her bedside, and I know people would say, well, Popeye, that's for that's to protect her privacy. Come on, that's crap. Because if it were anybody else, you'd see the pictures splashed all over the media. So why are there no photos of her? And I find it shady, and I also find it shady that all the video, and I think it was somewhere around 200, if I remember correctly, 200 different videos that the FBI has that they won't release from the parking lot, from cell phones, cameras, security cameras. Where's all the pictures? Where's the video?
Well, that's correct, and that happens with all of these false flag shootings. Is the first thing that gets confiscated is the tapes, and they never are released. I mean, why haven't we been shown one single ounce of crime scene? I mean, are they afraid that we can't handle it? I mean, I don't think so. I think it's because they completely messed up from the very beginning, and they didn't get their story straight. And a lot of people, there's a lot of people even that are missing that originally, were, I guess, interviewed in this case that cannot be found now. And so a lot of people have a lot at stake in this case. And a lot of these drills that take place, whether they go live or if it's an operation like this, the first thing they do is put a gag order on it. Nobody can talk. None of the pictures can be released. We even seen it in the Aurora, Colorado shooting where, supposedly the family claims that they don't want to even use his real name in media because, they just don't want him remembered that way. Well, I'm sorry, but when it comes to reporting the truth news, I mean, who's going to cover up his name? I mean, that's what this whole case, the Jerry Lee Loughner case, was about. It was about covering up what really happened and pushing the medical agenda through. And it wasn't just the medical agenda as far as suspended animation. It goes very deep into mind control. And when I say that, what I mean is total control of the mind. That is the goal that they have set out for the American people, is total control of the mind. And how they're going to do that is through mental illness, and that is one of the biggest agendas that also happened behind the scenes of this Tucson shooting. Was not only the medical agenda for the suspended animation, but also the push for mental illness. And so if they can get as many people they can diagnosed with mental illness, and that means less drivers on the street, less guns in the hands of the American people. And so what they're doing is they're basically working towards making sure that all of us are muted, and they're going to do that through mental illness, and they're going to do it through the push for mental health, and they've already started and begun that. And so, people need to be aware what the real agenda is, and it's for total control of the mind.
And they're doing it. And you could see it every aspect. They want to chip people. I think it was CNN that was talking about putting brain chips in people the other day. They had a segment about that. I've heard people discuss, it's going to be cool in the future. Cell phones, look how small they are now. In the future, 20, 30 years, it'll just be a little implant in your head, and you can just like touch your finger to your ear and you'll be able to talk. Yeah, that's nice. That's real nice, considering the technology that's already available, that they can beam things into your noodle.
Well, it's nice for the zombies, but it's not nice for the rest of us. I mean,
no.
We don't want to be part of it.
No, I don't want to be mind controlled. See, you know what the problem is? They don't want uppity slaves. To simplify it, they don't want uppity slaves. They want the slaves to sit back, shut up, do what they're told, and not put up a fight. And they haven't been able to. They've been able to chemically dumb us down. They've been able to brainwash us to a certain extent, but that human spirit, that fight, is still within people. The urge to resist, and even though they've pumped tons and tons of fluoride into the water supply, all these drugs and everything, they still have not been able to get rid of resistance. And what they're trying to do now with this stuff, they could just pretty much turn people into brain dead automatons, and that's really what they're going for. Just unbelievable, ladies and gentlemen. I told you this whole Jared Lee Loughner, Gabrielle Giffords thing was very shady, and there was so much more to it. And even 2 hours isn't enough time, and unfortunately, we are out of time for this evening. But I urge you, if you want to know the full details of this, if you want to get to the bottom of the story, first of all, it's going to take you a couple hours of reading. It's a few pages, as Stephanie said, over 400 pages. Go to thegovernmentrag.com. That's Stephanie's website. Donate a couple bucks. You'll get a copy of you'll see that it's on the right-hand side. You'll get a copy of her report on Loughner and on the Gifford shooting, and it'll blow your mind. I'm telling you right now, it's a deep rabbit hole, and I urge you to go investigate it. Ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. Thank you so much for tuning in. Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on the broadcast. It is an honor, and I have to have you back on again sooner rather than later. Ladies and gentlemen, we are out of here.